Hello everybody, and thank you for coming today, and thank you especially to our 4 speakers who have given up a lovely spring evening to be with us tonight, so very, very much appreciate that. I'm going to introduce our speakers in a minute, if that's all right. I quickly wanted to summarise what we're doing already in Yealmpton and in the wider Fife parish area, and also to explain a little bit about why we wanted to host this forum today. I'm afraid I made a PowerPoint in a little bit of a hurry and I hoped to shorten it. I haven't had time, so I'm going to have to, next slide, quite fast. And you're going to keep me on track, aren't you? Thank you, Philip. Because we're hoping to finish by 9 o'clock tonight, which should leave time for some questions at the end for everybody. Okay, sorry, the title, if that's all right, going back. Life on the Verge, rewilding our public green spaces. It is what it says on the tin tonight. I know there's a lot of talk about rewilding in the media, and a lot of it applies to farmland and large estates, which are beyond our control. We can hope that the government ELM grants kick in and make a difference, but the jury's out on that because we've got trade deals going on with countries with little or no environment standards. So fingers crossed, but in the meantime, what can we as individuals do with the space that we have control over through our parish councils, our district councils and our county councils? So that's basically what we're going to be concentrating on today. Next slide, please. So a little bit of the doom and gloom, which I was going to cut some of these out, so I'll race through. A lot of you know this already, I know, but we live in an algorithm-driven news world where some of us know things that others don't, and vice versa. So basically, we're here because there's a problem. Most of us recognise there is one. Some people think it happens in Brazil and Africa, Indonesia, but it's actually here on our doorstep in Britain. So just thinking from a slightly macro level to a micro level, really, obviously we're going to talk about what we can do locally, but on a nationwide level, we've got Britain being called one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. It's become quite a famous quote by the WWF. Just rush through a few of these rather miserable statistics, and then I promise it won't be any more doom and gloom. But between 1970 and 2013, 56% of species in the UK declined. We've got 1 in 5 of our mammals, native mammals, are in danger of extinction, including our beloved hedgehog. We have more than 40 million birds that have dropped out of the sky, according to the RSPB. A little bit of emotive language, but there we are. Since 1970, when I think the most comprehensive record started in 1970. Okay, next, please. Thanks. So, the biggest declines, of course, are in our invertebrate and insect worlds. Next slide, please. I rather like this quote from Bug Life, the small things that run the world. And 40% of insect species in Britain are in decline since the 70s. The species that are most hard hit, moths, butterflies, ladybirds, ground beetles, they've dropped between 65 and 70% since the 70s. This is all in our lifetime. And they call it the splatometer test, don't they, where anyone who was around in the 70s, I can remember it well, you'd open a window on a summer night and you'd be invaded by winged intruders. Doesn't really happen anymore. And your windscreen, when you drive through the country lanes, again, it comes home clean. This is something that's deteriorated, certainly in my lifetime, in everybody's lifetime here. So we are facing a problem. It's not just about the bees, but the bees seem to be the poster boys and girls for this crisis. Next, please. Why? Again, I think nearly all of us know the reason why. It's because of intensification in farming, which started after the Second World War and is only getting more and more of a problem. Then you've got urbanisation and road building. I believe the government's talking about 17 billion, aren't they, of investment in more road building. We've got developments coming up on our doorstep here and all over the country. And then, of course, there's global warming, which is a further threat to insect habitats. Next, please. Sorry, Phil. So, back to closer to home, the South Hams District Council declared... actually, could you just go to the next slide 1 second? Thank you. I think we all know this, but in case we don't, the Climate Change and Biodiversity Emergency was declared by the government in 2019. Then Devon County Council, I think, came, South Hams, And since then, the whole of our 5 parish alliance and other parishes around and about, I believe, as well, have declared a climate and biodiversity emergency. And of course, there are legal obligations that go hand in hand with that, which also rest on the shoulders of our parish councils. Sorry, could you go back one? Thank you. So, recently, the South Hams District Council has asked our parishes to, to respond to its proposals to change some of its maintenance schemes, management schemes over our green spaces. Yealmpton Parish Council has yet to respond, so this is something that you can get involved with if you feel passionately on either side of the debate. Try and find out more about what their proposals are. They did have a public consultancy, which some of you might have responded to last year. How many people? 1,000 people responded to the consultation. Sorry, not consultancy, consultation. Over 97% were in favour of general principle of improving biodiversity and wildlife value, and 90% in favour of relaxing cutting regimes on grass verges, leaving areas of long grass and verges, and the peripheries of parks, and new areas of wildflower planting on South Hams owned areas. Less than 5% of the written comments presented a negative comment to the principles of relaxing cutting regimes and long grass. Okay, next please. Oh, and the next one. So why rural areas? I thought I wanted to add this question because I know it's asked of me quite a lot. We have quotes that are often heard when we're writing about doing the maintenance on our existing wildflower verges. You know, this is fine in the cities. Why do we bother here in rural areas? Everything looks green and pleasant. Well, rural areas are the parts of the country that have seen the biggest declines in wildlife because, of course, 70% of our land is covered by farms, including here. And it's the intensive farming, the loss of wildflower meadows, wildflower field margins that are causing these declines. So here, arguably more than anywhere, is where we need to do the work. Next, please. Just as one little example, our lovely hedgehog. I find, you might have heard these reports recently, but the decline in hedgehogs is actually worse in rural areas than it is in urban areas. Just some of the statistics that are out from various studies. In the rural areas, since 2000, hedgehog numbers have declined between 30 and 75% depending on the area. Whereas in urban areas, the decline has stabilised a little bit more. Next, please. But the good news is we have public green spaces that we have ownership of. 300,000 miles of road verges across the UK, 300 million acres of functional green space in the UK, according to the government, which includes parks, school grounds, churchyards, and 23 million gardens, covering an estimated 10 million acres. That's something that we can all make a difference to, one way or another. Next, please. So what's already happening across the 5 parishes? Next, please. It's all about the people. I was going to expand on that, we haven't got time, but one thing I've learned since running a little group called, sorry, yes, the next one please, called Be Wild in Yealmpton, which started 4 years ago, is that, you know, you read stories, don't you, about people throwing seed bombs out of car windows, guerrilla bombing. It doesn't work. Unless you're engaging with people, engaging with your local authorities, councils, volunteer groups, schools, it's not going to make a difference. So that's the message that I'm hoping is going to come across from our 4 speakers today is, you know, the benefits and the the benefits of working with people and the community. And of course we all know that the mental health benefits too of connecting people with nature and getting back outside and learning more about our natural world. Next, please. So this is Be Wild Yealmpton, just a few of the things that we've been doing over the 4 years. We started, actually, sorry, could you go to the next one, Phil? And the next one. Oh, sorry, go back, I must have missed one. We started with a patch of bare land, which I thought I had a picture of, but I don't, in the corner of Stray Park. Was it the previous?
It's the previous one, yeah.
Sorry, the previous one. Not easy, am I? There we go.
In the corner.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite small up there. That was us clearing a patch of bare land that was gifted to us in a way by the Kitley estate, very kindly, and the Southampton Parish Council said, go ahead, make yourself a wildflower meadow. So we did. It's 4 years old now. Next slide, please. It changes year on year because it's a perennial. We seeded 26 different species of flowers. We've hosted various community days. Built a very large insect house. We've had Mother Day events with children making seed bombs and crafts. We've been planting wildflower, pollinator-friendly bulbs with the brownies. We've planted 30 fruit trees over the 4 years. And a little hedgerow, which was, Andrew helped us with actually back in the day, didn't you? Next, please. And next, please. We have the Yealmpton Environment Group, which was set up last year, and that's affiliated with the Parish Council in Yealmpton. Its first project was to start the wildflower verges. 2 areas, Torbridge Park, which anyone who lives in Yealmpton will know about. It's near the Texaco garage, and the long verge along Ford Road, which is the road that you use to get to Newton and Nosmea. Last week we planted, between Be Wild and the Environment Group, we planted 16 cherry blossom trees. And we have some, there's some lovely community benefits. For example, we have James here, who's on his Duke of Edinburgh volunteering course, helping us out. Next, please. On the wildflower verges, Tom's going to be telling us about the hows and whys of doing that from Devon County Council in a minute. There are sensitivities around it, of course. The first year of a wildflower verge, if it's done from scratch, doesn't always look pretty. You have to wait to see what comes up. You have to do a survey at the end of that and then decide how you might want to intervene or not. The residents of Torbridge Park were not happy with the appearance of the wildflower verge in the first year. So instead of that, we planted some blossom trees, and we're going to just leave that area for a little while and concentrate on the Ford Road verge, which has now got a row of cherry trees, and we will be seeding, doing a combination approach after a survey that we took from Devon Wildlife Trust. Thank you. Newton, Ferrers and Nosmea, I asked every parish to give a little bit of a summary, and unfortunately, well, fortunately actually, but there is so much in there, I'm afraid, that I'm going to have to just skim through. I think actually, Chris, did you quickly want to talk me, there you are.
Hi.
Did you quickly want to talk me through?
No, not really, you're doing a very good job on your own.
I wasn't there.
Basically, we're doing a whole load of tree planting here. This is in Stray Park. I beg your pardon, this is in Butts Park. You ought to be doing this, not me.
Go after you.
Peter Crossing.
Okay. If I read that carefully, now I can't even read it this close up.
No, I'm sorry.
I think, excuse me 1 second, I should just read you a couple of lines on there. Paul, who's due here tonight, unfortunately has gone down with the dreaded COVID, so I think he's fine, it's just he can't be with us. Bullet points. Verges. We've agreed to mow around the edge for neatness, but leave the central area to remain wild, to be cut just twice yearly. With the water tower and the verge on the approach to Newton Village. Dillon's Green, some wildflower seeding and snowdrop planting. Nos car park, tennis court, slope to be left uncut. Butts Park, that's the one there. Tree planting and some mown paths through newly planted copses. Opportunity for further tree planting to fill in gaps between 2 tree areas. Also rewilding between newly planted trees and hedgerow, 3 to 4 metre strips along 100 metre long. Butts Playground, variety of areas for rewilding and or shrubbery. Other green things, the Maria Christie, is that how it's pronounced? Christel, thank you. Tree warden setting up micro tree nurseries. Peter Brown is setting up a micro tree nursery as well. I think you want help on Saturday morning. Part of Yelm Estuary to Moor. Further tree planting, Butts Park awaiting consultation. God's Own Acre, working with the church. Working with Yelm Garden Society, increase homegrown produce. And in the Parish Jubilee Flower event, Yelm Garden Society and Angela McPherson, thank you very much indeed for starting to get that one off the ground. The Blue Heart signs are in manufacture, wildflower notice boards being investigated. Other environmental projects briefly: cycle back rack, composting, electrical transport through Yealmpton Community Electric Transport towards net zero, Plymouth Uni visioning, and River Yealm water quality led by Brixton, communication strategy to get the message out. That was his terribly quick line.
That's why it's in such small print.
If it made sense, I hope.
Sorry, we are going a little bit over, so I'm quickly going to run through Brixton. Similar progress to the rest of us. They've got a bee-friendly group as well. They're surveying and monitoring verges, and they've identified some for some wildflower intervention work. They're going to be planting, so keep an eye out for this, 11 cherry and apple trees along the A379, so that's on most of our route. And quite a nice bit of news down the bottom. They purchased a piece of land, the parish council, at Coffleet Creek, 3 years ago, and it's being managed by a group of volunteers led by the parish councillor, planting and restoration. So we're going to have to rush on from Brixton. Apologies to Brixton. We can forget Modbury. No, they're doing wonderful work, but they're not part of our 5 parish alliance, and I really quickly wanted to just plug. They're doing wonderful work. We'll have a whole other thing on Modbury. But Matt Chen, councillor of Wembury and South Hams District Council, started a 5 parish alliance group just before COVID, actually, wasn't it, Matt? And unfortunately, that slowed us down a little. But a member from the councils, each of the 5 councils, Brixton, Newton and Noss, Yealmpton, Wembury and Holberton, meet every month, and we share ideas and expertise and a little bit of moral support to see if we can start pushing forward some joint projects. So please watch this space for the 5 Parish Alliance. Wembury will be covered by Andrew's talk later, the Wild Wembury project, which we're hoping to emulate in some ways in Yealmpton. And that's it from me. Sorry to go slightly over. Tom Whitlock from Devon County Council is the ecologist there. He's heavily involved in the Life on the Verge, Road Verge scheme, and he's going to tell us about the hows and the whys of that. Thanks, Tom.
Yes, thanks all. I'll wait for my presentation to load up. I'm Tom, pleased to be here. Devon County Council Ecologist. My main role is within planning, so I'm a planning ecologist, is most of my day job, but I also work with our Devon County Council Highways team to improve biodiversity along our highways network. So I'm going to talk briefly about Devon County Council, what our highways policy is with regards to grass cutting, how parishes across Devon are getting involved. Next slide, please.
It's all right, don't worry. Technology,
Never goes smoothly, does it?
okay.
There we go, yes. Some of this stuff most of you may already know, so I'll just have a sort of a whistle stop through it. Value of road verges, Kate touched on it in her talk, but road verges are really good wildlife corridors, contribute greatly to areas of green infrastructure throughout the county. And Devon is in an enviable position for many, but if you talk to my highways colleagues, they probably would rather it be slightly smaller. But given Devon is the size it is, we actually have over 2,000 hectares of road verge throughout the county. It's the largest, one of the largest road networks in Britain. What that means is there's plenty of opportunity where habitats can be created or enhanced along our road verges. So road verges themselves, Parklife have done some research, loads of research over the years, and they actually support over 700 species, that's of plants alone. And that equates to 45% of our native flora are found on road verges. But as I'm sure you're all aware, flora diversity along road verges for a number of different reasons, mainly mismanagement, has led to a 20% drop. They also suffer quite greatly from nutrient pollution, given they are roads and next to cars. And a lot, especially in rural counties such as Devon, a lot of our road verges are old remnant wildflower meadows, especially in rural areas. And the UK has seen a 97% loss of those types of habitats since the 1930s. Again, as Kate said, huge wildlife losses. And one of the benefits of road verges from a sort of parish and town council perspective is that the public, members of the public generally love wildflower verges. They love seeing that, again, as Kate mentioned, especially after the last 2 years. People like to see those sorts of habitats in their local area. And Parklife do a petition each year called the Good Verge campaign, and over 16,000 people signed that last year. So it's clear that road verges are on the agenda for people and wanting to get them managed for wildlife. Next slide, please. So DCC cutting policy, like I said, I'll whistle through this. So Devon County Council used to cut all road verges in Devon up until 2013, where the budget for our highways department was cut, so now they don't do that. Since 2013, Devon County Council only cuts road verges for health and safety reasons. So that essentially means visibility displays at the side of junctions, forward approaches to signage and lay-bys. So that's what Devon County cuts. Any other cutting outside of what is for health and safety isn't done by Devon County Council, and I'll come to touch on that in a minute. And within Devon County, there's two types of cutting regime. So they've got the rural cutting, it's called, which is on roads which are 60 miles an hour or more. And what they'll do is it'll be a minimum of 1 cut a year of visibility displays along that network. 2 if the growing season is particularly quick. So last year it was 2, for example. And that cut is undertaken from mid-May to mid-June. And what DCC does is it starts on the higher category roads, so it'll start on the A roads and work its way down to the C roads by the end of the summer, and it will cut it once, again only on vis displays. Urban cutting is slightly different, so urban cutting is roads which are 40 miles an hour or less, so even villages in Devon are counted as urban cutting. And again, just the visibility displays, the junctions, signage and lay-bys, they're cut 4 times a year on those roads, usually within villages and towns. So it's the same thing, only for safety, but they are cut 4 times a year, with the first cut starting in April, working its way through to September. Some parish and town councils, which some of you may be aware of, have taken over control of their urban cutting, and they have taken responsibility for the cutting of those health and safety, those visibility displays. And what they'll do is DCC will work out how much money it costs us to cut your verges, and it will pay the parish and town council that set amount of money. And then any other additional cutting on top of that is done at the cost of the parish and town council.
Could I just intervene there? One minute, Tom, because in Yealmpton, just out of interest, the parish council elects to have the verges cut 12 times. So they're paying for the extra 8 cuts on top of it. That's it, yeah. So a lot of the time, whilst that is actually can be quite beneficial, so if a parish or town council knows of a way of getting it cheaper, a farmer, for example, to cut their verges cheaper than what DCC is paying, then they get to pocket the excess money. But a lot of the time, any parish or town council that takes that option on is usually because they feel not enough verges are cut, or they're not cut frequently enough. So that, if there is a parish or town council, like the case is in Yealmpton, is usually to do additional cuts and cut more, so it's cut shorter and more frequently. Next slide, please. Each electoral division in Devon, so it's not split up in parish and town councils, it's split up into electoral divisions, but each one has what is known as a neighbourhood highways officer, who is a Devon County Council employee, who works with local parish and town councils and is meant to be the conduit between local councils and DCC highways. And they have a whole wealth of knowledge about the local area. So they'll know which verges are owned by Devon County Council, they'll know which ones are cut for visibility displays and which ones are for health and safety. They'll have other knowledge such as where drainage features are, which verges are managed for specific reasons. And they can also provide local support, not just on grass cutting, but for a whole host of reasons, fixing potholes, for example, ditch works, ditch clearance, all that sort of stuff. And verges on major trunk roads such as the A30, A38 and M5 are Highways England, they're not Devon County Council managed. So they have their own verge management plans for a whole host of verges across, especially Devon. They have a far wider budget, but that's a Highways England managed road verges. Next please.
Special verges may be something that you are aware of. Essentially, since the early 90s, Devon designated a whole number of special verges throughout the county. They're designated for a whole host of reasons. There's 112 in total, but they're for various reasons, such as, you know, they support a rare species, they're very important for the community, usually because they are a really good example of quite a rare habitat, so heathland or wildflower meadow or something like that. And they're designated throughout the whole county. And they are demarcated with a red post. So if you ever see a wooden post with a red top, that indicates a special verge. The reason I'm mentioning this is, as I'll touch on in a minute, whilst DCC used to manage these quite frequently up until 2013, if it's not on a display anymore, if it's not health and safety, these special verges haven't been managed. So we're coming up to 9 years now with limited management on these special verges. So a number of these verges arguably are not as special as they once were, which is unfortunate, which is something I'll go on to touch on in a minute. But it's just to mention that actually we are doing a review of our special verge criteria, because there may be some verges which could be designated as special verges, which are under regular management, which have really interesting floristic diversity, which aren't currently designated. So just to raise that we are looking to change or enhance our special verge criteria as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Right, so yes, verges need managing. Again, this may be something that you guys are already aware of. The way to manage a road verge with biodiversity is to treat it like a wildflower meadow. So regular annual management is essential. They need to be cut, preferably twice a year, but once a year can also work. But they need to be cut every year, and they need to preferably be cut when the flowers on your verge have flowered, set seed. As I said, their timing is everything. Cutting too early, obviously, whilst the flowers are in flower, prevents them from setting seed and doesn't allow the grassland to continue into additional years. So that's essential. And as you may have picked up from DCC's current grass cutting policy, we don't regularly manage all road verges anymore. So a number of road verges are unmanaged. So in Devon, we're in a bit of an odd situation where we're not asking our highways authority to reduce the number of cutting that they do, because they do the bare minimum as it is, just for health and safety reasons. We're actually asking them to potentially look at increasing the number of cuts they do on our rural road network in order to get road verges back into management. Oh, yes.
When you have these special verges, when you cut them,
yes,
does everything have to be removed for the cuttings or what?
Well, so as I said, so with for Devon County, if it's for special verges, we have management plans for every special verge, but we don't cut all special verges anymore, unfortunately, unless they're on a visibility display. But Devon County policy is to cut, right down to ground level, full width of the verge, and as I'll go on to touch on, the best way to manage a grassland verge is that way, full width, right down to grass level, and then remove the arisings. For these special verges, as I said, up until 2013, that is what happened. But since then, the management doesn't occur as annually, as frequently as it needs to. And as I say, timing is everything. As I said, unfortunately, due to health and safety reasons, grass grows the most in May and June. That's when DCC cuts it. It is less than ideal, especially when we do get a verge which has some floristic interest. It will get cut between May and June. That is just DCC policy at the moment. We have had discussions about changing that, but it does become a safety issue if the grass grows too long, and obviously Devon County would have to accept increased liability were there to be an accident. So next slide, please. As I said, two-cut management approach is ideal. The idea being it suppresses really coarse grassland. So under management of verges is a more slow process than over management, but is just as detrimental in the long term. So wildflowers obviously need low nutrient soils, and they get outcompeted quite easily by scrub and tall coarse grasses if they're not cut every year. So hence why cutting back the grass every year, restricting grass growth, is the best way to get wildflower on your verges. Yes.
So in that case, why do you pay councils, parish councils, to cut 4 times a year?
because that's on our the health and safety displays, as I said before. So the four cuts would be just on the visibility display, so it won't be all verges essentially. Again, it's not ideal. 4 times a year throughout April through to September isn't in line with verge management for wildlife, but it is the health and safety policy for Devon County at the moment, and I have really tried to have those discussions. Yes. To have those discussions about altering the timing of cutting, but because it's a health and safety issue, that and understandably, Devon is reluctant to change that timing. Next. Next slide, please. So cut and collect. That's again, most of you are probably aware. That's the key. As I said, high fertility soils, wildflowers don't do very well on them. So the key is to cut the grass, remove the arisings. If you let arisings sit on road verges or any grassland, it will rot down and add nutrients back into the soil, which promotes grass growth rather than wildflower growth. So 2 cuts a year, rake everything off. Sometimes, obviously, grass waste can cost a bit of money to remove and get rid of appropriately. So what some people have done, what some community groups have done, have just been to rake grass into one area of the verge and let it all rot down in one area, to sacrifice a small area of the verge to allow the rest to not have a heavy nutrient load. But the key thing is to get the grass off when you cut it. Normally the idea is to cut it, wait a couple of days to allow any seeds to fall to the ground or any invertebrates to move out of the way, and then rake it up and remove the grass. And the key thing really is managing public perceptions, as I'm sure Kate can talk about. Wildflower meadows, wildflower grass verges, if you provide them and you want to try and produce them naturally by regular management rather than planting or seeding, they take a long time and they look brown. That's a simple thing really. The best verges for wildlife are quite short in terms of the height of the grass, and there's quite a lot of herbs in a small area. All those colours mix into one, and from a distance they look brown. That is how it is. So public perception is key, because to anyone that doesn't look like a well-managed verge. It looks messy, it looks untidy, it doesn't look particularly colourful, especially for the first couple of years, but actually they are really, really good for wildlife. It was interesting to hear that cutting narrow strips around the edge of verges is being done. That's actually a really good way of doing it, because there's always a balance between wildlife and tidiness, whether that's a road verge or a churchyard or any public space. That's always going to be a discussion that people are going to have because there'll always be those two sides. So especially with road verges, cutting narrow strips around the edge of the verge is actually a really good idea, because it shows to people we're isolating this area for wildlife, but we're also we're really keen to make sure that the perception of the verge is still one of tidiness. So that's really important. Managing public perceptions is a key part. Next slide, please. I'll just very, very briefly touch on Life on the Verge in Devon, which is a scheme that DCC is helping support communities with. It started off as a pilot in the North Devon Biosphere, which was a HLF-funded project which basically got community groups in the North Devon Biosphere to manage all the special verges in that area by regular management. As I said, none of them have been managed by DCC for a number of years, so it was about getting those verges managed. And that project ended in 2019 and has been subsequently trialled to be rolled out across the county, so I'll just quickly touch on that. Step one, if you're interested in managing a road verge, it doesn't have to be a special verge, it could be any road verge in your community, is to contact me first to see if it's a good idea. A lot of the time, we would always advise against seeding or planting of bulbs as the first instance, because a lot of seed packets are quite homogeneous in the species. They're not adapted to local soil conditions, and what you can do is if you blanket bomb verges or areas of grassland with seed packets at the first stage, it could actually diminish the local species of flower that's already in the seed bank. So the first step we would always recommend is to manage your area of grassland to see what comes in. Cut it twice a year, remove the arisings, do that for 2 years, see what happens, maybe scarify a bit of the area, so make some bare soil or whatever. After that, if nothing comes up, then we can start looking about speeding the process along, planting yellow rattle, seeding of wildflowers, all that sort of stuff. And then the second step would be to contact your neighbourhood highways officer to see, as I mentioned before, whether the verge is a display, whether it's going to be cut twice a year by DCC, whether there's any other safety issues you need to be aware of. Next slide, please. Step 2 is health and safety. That's obviously paramount. So for DCC verges that DCC owns, in order to be covered by the third-party public liability insurance from Devon County Council, you have to have done a highway safety course. Crucially, it doesn't cover personal liability insurance, just third party. But if you've done the highway, if you're working on the highways to manage road verges and you've done the safety course and you've done all the appropriate steps, you do classify as a volunteer, hence why you're covered by the third party DCC insurance. Next slide, please. Step 3, again, Kate touched on this before, always assess the existing value of a verge. Some verges might require slightly tweaked management, so depending on the flowering times of your species, you could get away with a cut in late July if it's a spring flowering verge, or you may have to wait till the end of September if it's a July to August flowering verge. But assess the existing value of verge is really key, just to understand what's there. There's loads of tools online, Devon Wildlife Trust, Plant Life, loads of plant ID tools that you can use. And the key thing is just to understand the requirements of your verge in terms of when your flowers flower, basically. Next slide, please. And then management, as I've said before, the Good Verge Guide is a plant life document that's available online. It's got a load of detail on there about how to manage a road verge. As I said, treat it like a hay meadow. There is some, there's a number of ways to go about it. You may see some verges which are, I don't know if you ever drive through Exeter, it's known as Wild City, where every year they scarify a large area of the verge, they take the topsoil off and then they seed it with annuals. So there's a lot of corn cockle and cornflowers, a lot of arable flowers in there. They give an instant flower hit, it's no grasses involved, it's just flowers. They give an instant hit and then they die off. That's one way of doing it, but as I said before, that doesn't really, in certain areas that isn't really applicable because they outcompete the native wildflowers that are already on that verge. And 2, that is actually really expensive to do it that way because every year, because they're only annuals, every year you have to take the topsoil off and reseed it. Sometimes that isn't practical for a small parish or a local community. So always, always, always manage your verge first or manage your area of grassland first. See what species are there. There will be species. As I said, most road verges are remnant meadows, so there's always going to be species in there, in the seed bank. See what they are and then manage them accordingly. I've got a few examples in the next slide. Just of a project that was done. This one's actually in Seaton. Again, this is all available on the Devon County Council website. Just an idea of what they've done for a special verge, and it's basically what I've touched on. But I'll finish there, I think. Yeah, I assume it's questions at the end, is it?
I think questions at the end.
Questions at the end.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
There
you
you go. That was me.
very much,
Thank you.
So next we've got Lynne Kendardine from the Devon Wildlife Trust. Lynne has actually just visited Newton and Noss, I believe, a week or 2 ago to give a talk on the Avon Valley project, which is a very exciting project. But today she's going to tell us about the wildlife benefits of wild verges.
Hi everyone, thanks Kate for inviting me, and it's good to be here. It's good to see some familiar faces in the audience. I'm Lynne Kendardine. I work with Devon Wildlife Trust. As Land Management Advisory Officer, I work with farmers and landowners, and I take a lead on the Avon Valley project, where I've had the pleasure of working on a habitat connectivity catchment-based approach for the past 10 years. But I'm off-piste today. I'm on the verge. You can't see can you just see life on the verge? And it's great to see through Tom's slides and all the great work that's been done here locally. Things are beginning to turn around. There's much more happening on our verges than there was 5 years ago. So I've left some of these brochures there about the Avon Valley project if you want to have a look at it. One of the things I'm involved with there that's relevant to this work is wildflower meadow creation and restoration. and I'll touch on that in my talk. So, without further ado, I just wanted to say as well, 5 years ago I worked on a freelance basis surveying the Wembury verges. I surveyed about 40 verges in Wembury, so I'm bringing some of that experience to bear here. So, yeah, our verges generally in Devon are becoming a bit more diverse, which is good to see. On the right here, this is a verge in Loddiswell parish, which took many an eye this year. I think it was seeded a couple of years ago by local ecologists there, with a really good seed mix, and it's providing a buzz in the centre of the village. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Should be, yeah. Yeah, I took this picture today. This is my verge at the bottom of my road. The Alexanders are just starting to come out. The stone parsley, the cow parsley. And my favourite verge actually contains winter heliotrope. Now this is considered an invasive species, and I know a lot of money is spent on controlling it and eradicating it. But the good thing about winter heliotrope is that it's in flower when most things aren't. It flowers November, December, January, just as the ivy flowers are probably fading. It's got a lovely name, it's called the sun turner, because it will turn its head to wherever the sun is. I don't know if anyone here has ever smelt the fragrance of winter heliotrope, but it's absolutely delightful. It's got such a beautiful vanilla scent. It's no wonder that any queen bees that are still out on sunny days in winter are attracted to this. Very invasive because of the large leaf, but to this lovely plant. So my talk is going to appeal to those of you who like a bit of chaos and a bit of the untidy, which nature loves. And why does this work matter? Next slide, please. Well, Kate did a brilliant job of setting the context, so I won't dwell too much on this. But why does biodiversity matter? I can't believe that we are in a climate and biodiversity state of emergency. I don't know if I can explain why nature matters, because it just does. It provides us with many of our basic needs, with the air that we breathe, clean water, stabilises our environment, our soils, our food, our housing, our shelter, and then on top of that, you know, it recycles our waste, and then on top of the green carpet, the multitude of life forms that we share our space with. Of course it matters. And this chap, Professor John Lawton, in his 2010 review of England's wildlife sites and ecological networks, 10 years ago, was stating what poor quality, how degraded our habitats have become, and how species poor we've become. And what we needed was this phrase, bigger, better, and more joined up. Next slide, please. And more joined up means reconnecting. So within our conservation world, we talk about habitat fragmentation. Basically, that's because our farming has become so intensive and the pace of development taking up more and more land. Our wildlife isn't confined to nature reserves, but those hubs of areas that are good for nature have become isolated. So if there's a nature reserve here, and there's a nature reserve here, how a creature's going to get around, move around our landscape, how they're going to get around in the advent of climate change. This is a farm in Modbury, not too far away from here, a farm by a chap called Roger Hosking. Many of you may know of Roger. And his daughter Rebecca spoke very passionately at a meeting I was at recently about how they were losing the common species from their land, and it's no wonder. It's surrounded by arable land with very poor links to it. And no one creature symbolises the need for connectivity more than the dormouse. The adults tend to be quite sedentary once they've established themselves, but the young need hedgerows to disperse and move around our landscape. That's just one of the reasons why we need to reconnect. Next slide, please. So Kate's already touched on this. I won't go over it again, but perhaps the most alarming thing is the loss of common species. So the collapse of food webs, reduction in nesting sites, roosting sites, and a general degraded quality of our habitats. Next slide, please. And these are just some species that we once thought of or may still think of as common. These were all in my garden when I moved there 20 years ago. They're not anymore, with the exception of the dunnock. This bird in the right-hand corner. Extremely common bird, but it's on the amber list of threatened birds because even though populations are still good, they're declining. The bullfinch in decline, amber listed. Swallows declining. Song thrush declining, and the hedgehog, Kate's already said, we're losing it from our countryside, but better news for hedgehogs in our towns and villages. Next slide, please. Village corridors are vital connections. How you manage your green spaces is really, really important. The habitat connectivity that I talked about isn't limited to the farmland. It's right in all our backyards. Open spaces, your parks, school grounds, churchyards, your gardens, whether it's a window box or a courtyard garden or something a bit bigger, and road verges, really important parts of that. Next slide, please. That says road verges, they have an important part to play in these habitat networks. Next slide, please. But most of us tend to just think of the verge as being the narrow grassy strip that we see, when in reality there are a number of habitats. So we look at this bit. That's the bit we're familiar with. But they are more often than not going to have an adjoining habitat. Here it's a hedge. It could be a stone wall. It could be a fence. Some of them have ditches, wet or dry ditches associated with them. Some of them have hedge banks, bare ground. And they are this important interface between the farmed landscape or the residential, the urban, and vice versa. For our wildlife, as Tom said, they're really important corridors, and they're these transition zones. So there's a lot happening within the verge. It's not just on the flat bit. Next slide, please. They're often easily overlooked because they don't look very special. Now, Tom's already referred to the fact that Exeter Wild City, in the middle of Exeter and in the middle of Plymouth a few years ago, The verges really came alive with arable plants, with poppies and corn cockles, with areas being planted up. But our lowland meadows aren't showy. The flowers are tiny, and you can't even, at a glance, it's really difficult to know what's going on. This is a verge in Wembury area. Doesn't look particularly special, does it? Doesn't look like anything. But actually, when you're on it, everything's in miniature. There's little hawkweeds, and there's one of the most notable plants in Devon. Does anyone know what that is?
It's not ladies' autumn tresses.
It is.
It is.
Yeah. Ladies' autumn tresses. A very rare plant, and it's absolutely covered in it. And because it's mown quite a lot, so it's a really short turf, loads of plants have adapted to that. But you need to be on it and looking carefully to see it. But because we can't see it, just like the marine environment, doesn't mean that it's not of value. Next slide, please. When we talk about conservation, we talk about managing for invertebrates because they are the building blocks of everything else. This isn't in Devon, it's in Dorset. It was a photo that I found today, but there is Tom mentioned special verges, special verge on the A38 between Buckfastleigh and Ashburton, where there are 90 species of plant, plus, well over 90, including pyramidal orchids, southern marsh orchids, and such a wide range of wildflowers. It's untrue. By adjusting the timing of the cutting, it can make such a huge difference. But for our insects, if everything's cut off and mown really short, nothing gets a chance to flower, nothing gets a chance to seed. Nothing flowering or a limiting flowering means a reduction in pollen and nectar sources. I just wanted to read from a report, don't worry, it's a list, it's not the report, but Parklife did a survey of road verges in Devon and Cornwall in 2016, and they talked about the value of verges for our insects. And this list blew me away because I'd never thought of flies in this way. Flies, a wide range of life cycles. The dung feeders, the herbivores, the detrivores, the predators, the parasitoids, the carrion feeders, those that live in water, those that feed with fungi, some association with fungi, mammal ectoparasites, bloodsuckers, dead wood and tree wound associated, and those that live in bee, wasp or ant nests. Our insect life is just, it's colossal, isn't it? But if we tend to appreciate what we can see, butterflies, day-flying moths, six-spot bonnet, buff-tailed bumblebee, small copper butterfly, they all need pollen and nectar sources. But they all need something else too. Next slide, please. And this, where it gets a bit messy, folks, because this is coarse grassland, rough, tussocky, uncut grassland. Now these sites are just as important as the flowering and nectar sites, because these are where butterflies, moths will lay their eggs, where spiders will overwinter. These are where animals will go for shelter. And so having a bit of coarse grassland, areas in our garden, corners that you leave just to do their own thing. And if you've got a tussocky grass called cocksfoot, which naturally forms tussocks. As it grows up, it dies, grows up, it dies back, and you get this, you get the tussocks that form. Not only is that deeper rooting, so it's really good in the soil because it's attracting all the soil fungi and all the worms and everything to make a nice fertile soil. At times of drought, it'll reach deeper in the soil, so it's drought resistant, but it provides this wonderful habitat for our insect life. Next slide, please. The common carder bee, next slide. They will seek out old mouse nests or vole nests. And voles need the tussocky grassland. They're seeking it out because they're sheltering from their predators. And then the bee comes along and it can get to work and establish its nest in the mouse nests. But it needs the subterranean kind of dwelling and protection of the coarse grass. Next slide, please. Also, verges aren't the domain, just the domain of insects. They're really useful for our mammals as well. Small mammals such as field voles and wood mice. Here's an example of a field vole nest. They make very loose structures out of grasses, and harvest mice. Now, a harvest mouse, I should say, that also weaves a nest out of grasses, and they can often be found in tussocky grassland. Next slide, please. And they, of course, are prey species for barn owls and kestrels. So this kind of coarser grassland habitat, however transient it is really, really valuable. And I'd like you to think of your road verges as a network right across your parishes, so that not every verge has to be wildflowers, not every verge has to be mown regularly. There could be some areas of bramble, there could be some areas of nettle, there could be some lovely areas of tree planting. You could create wildflower verges, but to have that variety within your verge network over your parishes, because then you are catering for a widest range of species possible. And just a word about bats in the left-hand corner there. They obviously need insects to feed on. Verges tend to be linear corridors, and bats will hunt and forage along those corridors as well. Next slide, please. This is Special Verge in Wembury. It's right at the entrance to the parish, and when they had the flower festival a few years ago, they put the boat on the side of the verge, which I thought was a bit strange. I talked to Keith Reynolds about it. I said, can't we get them to, just do something that shows that they've got all this natural beauty right next door to a boat full of non-native garden plants. But we can have both. But this is a group of volunteers raking off. And around the verges of Wembury, this is the wildlife that we spotted. Crickets, grasshoppers, bloody-nosed beetle, slow worm, mating common blue butterflies. The wildlife, the species are there, but if you build the habitat, they will find it. Next slide. Oh, go back to the other one. I just want to say about, if this wasn't a special verge already, really rich in wildflowers, and it was just grasses, then we have had meadow success by introducing yellow rattle. But you have to allow, when you've done the seeding, you have to allow you have to allow everything to come up and flower and seed again. This yellow rattle's a parasite. It will knock back the grass competition because it takes half its life force from the grasses. And it creates, over time, it will create bare ground, an opportunity for the finer leaved wildflowers to come through. But for the first few years, 2 years maybe, you might not see a lot. It might not look as if anything's happening, but the magic is happening. It's a bit like making wine or beer or bread. Sometimes it's in the leaving alone where that alchemical process occurs, and you can get habitat change. So try and live through that time where you think this hasn't worked, because believe you me, 2 or 3 years down the line, you'll be reaping the dividends. Next slide. But basically, I was amazed by all the great work you're doing already. Keep it up, keep going, and make the most of your verges. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Lynne. I think we learned a lot. I certainly did. I think Andrew from Parklife, are you all right to? So it's Andrew Price, who works for Parklife South West, and they have been running for Wembury the Wild Wembury project. They also work with Ivy Bridge County Councils and Totnes.
Totnes, yeah.
Doing lots of community projects in conservation. So, Andrew, please go ahead.
So actually, when we were at Parklife first started, before we became a CIC, our very first project was at Stray Park. So working with Kate and South West Water.
That's right, South West Water came
and the grant from Yealmpton Energy as well. So that was one of those just partnership workings how we all started getting together, finding new projects, looking at a wildflower meadow. So actually we became a CIC just over 2 years ago, and in the tail end of 2019, and we started working with Matt from Wembury, and that became a real partnership for us, because we became a CIC, so we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. So for us, working on the wildlife and working with the community together, making it fun, is what we're all about. So working with Parish Council and the AONB, we've also been working with the Wildlife Trust and National Trust. We're looking at making these spaces more wildlife friendly, but also including things like schools and bringing the volunteer numbers into it. And I don't know which photos we've got actually, because this was a sort of rushed together presentations. If we just flick to the next slide.
Is it possible to speak up, please?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So some of this is a little bit old and a little bit outdated, because just before we started in 2019, 2020, we were just picking up speed with Wild Wembury, and we had a whole programme of projects planned out, and then obviously the pandemic started. We were also working at that time with the Wembury Allotment Association, and we were creating a wildflower meadow with the Wembury Allotment Group and planting up some hedges. Obviously the pandemic came along, and just before that we had, I think, a day out where we had 30 or 40 people come out on a Saturday, do some seed bombing, plant a load of green bulbs in the green, so they're already coming up. So it's a good way of sometimes getting some bulbs in some green spaces established. So we're doing this in March, but one of the things we really were focused on is bringing the school out. So I think it was right back just before the pandemic, we had the school come out and we created and motivated some areas, and the kids came out and seed bombed. So we could have done that as a contractor and just stripped the ground back to the bare, raked it all off. And yeah, so this is where we bring in the blue hearts. I think some of them were created in Yealmpton. So it's really important to then highlight those areas we're creating into those verges or pieces of the parish land which has just been cut as short mown grass. So it was really important for us to bring the children in rather than it being run as a contractor project. So we get funding so we can bring in the children and bring in volunteers and work together. So yeah, this is Mewstone Avenue. So we've had a couple of goes trying to get this established. What's really good about this Verge is exactly what Kate's been talking about and what Lynne's been talking about. Is now at the moment this is what we call framing. So we cut the front of it in short mown grass, and then we rotivated and turf stripped parts of it, seeded it, and then we leave rough grass at either end. So we leave that tussocky, we let it go really long, we let the nettles become established so the insects can lay their eggs, so butterflies can lay their eggs and be left and not trimmed back. So you get that staggered approach, you get that habitat. And so obviously a lot of this was done with just Keith and I, because largely we've been in lockdowns, in and out of lockdown. So going forward, I don't know what's on the next slide now. Where are we there?
I've been interfering with your slides.
That wasn't the Apple Day, was it? So if you go to the next slide.
On the next one. No, that's Plymouth, isn't it? It's my fault actually, because we had two presentations and I sort of amalgamated them.
Just wondering. Okay, so this year, tail end of last year, so October last year. So this is on Wembury Recreation Ground. What we've done here is we came in a couple of days before, turf stripped just on the curve of the new path, rotivated, and I think we had that day 30 people come out, mostly children. And so this is what it's, for us, it's what it's about. It's engaging with younger people so they can get to know what we're up to and what we're doing, but it's having fun. So they had so much fun in digging into the strips. So in here they put in some bulbs. So I think we put in probably, looking at James here, about 10 different species of bulbs around the area. Yeah. But also on here is we're trying to get that annual mix and that perennial mix. So after we rotivated, we've put in seed of annuals in little strips, and then perennials in longer strips. So we get some of that instant colour. So hopefully this year when they come up, you'll get the instant colour which we're seeing in Plymouth around the roundabouts. But you're also going to have the more diverse grass strips as well. And later in the year we'll cut that with the volunteers, remove that green waste away and put it and make a habitat over in longer grass. But the other thing, I don't know if you can really see it. Can I lean across on this? You can't really see it on here. There's a load of trees planted here. And rather than just strimming around those year after year, we're using a new management regime where we're leaving the grass longish, so you've got those moles and small mammal habitats. And then we'll come along and do some maintenance, but we'll do it non-invasive. So we won't strim it and just rip the habitat out. We'll cut it back carefully, clear around the trees, so the trees can then become better established rather than being swamped by grass. But you're also leaving most of the habitat still there, so it's still really rich in invertebrates. I don't know if we've got the Apple Day.
Yes, yeah, the Apple Day.
So this is St Werburgh's. So we've actually, St Werburgh's is a fantastic, I don't know if you've ever been down there, it's got to be, it's probably the best churchyard I've ever been to, in the fact of the view there, but how it's already been managed. So it's really diverse, and then once a year they cut it. So we're just going to help them by having another smaller verge, a smaller patch just up here where it wasn't quite so diverse. So we'll just rotivate that and add a few more species of wildflowers in there. But the rest of it, absolutely buzzing. It's got those really thick hedges, fantastic space.
The next one is the next one again is the trees.
So again, this is working with the AONB, and this was in October last year. I think we had about 100 people come along. It was a really busy day, great day out. Again, they've got an orchard in there. We collected the apples. This is the thing, working with Matt and working with the local parish, and creating these days out that it's fun and educational, but we all had some great apple juice out of it. And I think next year we're going to try, or later this year, we're trying to have a preserver so people can take the apple juice away and make it last a lot longer. But we had a storytelling, but also explaining what we were doing. We were creating some more wild spaces in the orchard. So a lot of the grass had been trimmed once a year and then left. So, and apart from just cutting some paths in it, so we're working with the school that actually we'll cut that more, maybe twice a year, rake it off, and introduce some more wildflower seeds so it becomes more diverse again. But following on from this day, just last week we planted 600 whips with the school. So whips being 1 to 2 year old trees. But rather than just going there and us planting them in a day or two, we've done it with the school. And actually, I think we had 180 children came out over those 2 days and planted at least 3 whips each. So they've had that engagement, they've had that fun. And every single one of the children we spoke to said how they enjoyed that. And I think that's, for us as a community interest company, yes, we want to increase our diversity. We want to increase the amount of insects and wildlife around, but it's got to be with the community buy-in. And it's got to be with the younger people enjoying those days out. So that's why the first day we did in Stray Park, we had the storyteller come there as well, didn't we? So yeah, it's having that, bringing that connection in. And we've got more plans for Wild Wembury, and what we're trying to do is develop a plan where we've got 1 or 2 activities a month. So we need to go back to the Verges and do a little bit more wildflower seeding.
That was, is that relevant to this year? Or?
Yeah, so we've been out and we've retied. So unfortunately, a lot of what happens when trees get planted, they get left. So we'd like to do all the follow-up as well, and that, again, using the community to do that. So we've been out to Down Thomas, and we put in another 200 trees with the community group. I think we had 45 people turn up on a really wet, horrible, windy day. But the WI turned out in force, and I don't know if you've been to the little hall they've got at Wembury, at Down Thomas. So they opened that up and they kept everyone fueled with teas, coffees and bacon butties. So but it's a great day out. We had had loads of people turn up, and we managed to do all the tree care when we were there as well. So we managed to prune the apple trees back, managed to replace all the tree guards, all the trees that maybe were starting to get choked, and mulch around all the new trees. So yeah, it's making sure those things are happening. So we've been working with the allotment group probably for near on 3 years now. So we put in a wildflower area, and unfortunately I think because when people think of wildflowers, they think of those showy corn cockles and non-native species, and it didn't get the reception it wanted. And actually, when I went back after the first year, there was loads of diversity in there. There were loads of things, but again, it wasn't the flowering, beautiful, big flowers. So for me, I thought it was a success, but you get a lot of people who don't like that. They're not seeing that big colour. So what we've done to try and meet that both sides is we've re-rotivated and turf-stripped the front and put in something a bit more showy. And that's the way I think we're trying to see that's the way to do it, is have a short mown framing, have a showier mix at the front, and then a more native, biodiverse, deeper strip at the back, and then on top of that, a deeper layer of bramble and nettles. So, don't know if there's any more slides.
There's one more about a map, which was in the next one. Is that something that's ongoing?
Oh, yeah, so that's the Woods project.
Is that the Yes Street and More, Peter? It reminded me of...
So a lot of these woodlands are all these are privately owned, and National Trust, Woodland Trust, but they're also in smaller landowners. And a lot of these projects were originally assessed back in 2013 and hadn't been reassessed, and so it's trying to connect those landowners together. So we've been re-looking at that as Parklife with the AONB, and also seeing some of those landowners, because some of them have changed, but it's connecting those spaces together. So if some of them are degrading and not managed anymore, then we're trying to help them to bring them back into management or talk to them about options.
I think that was it really, Andrew. Sorry for messing up your slide.
That's all right.
Yeah. I just thought, so if you wouldn't mind going back to the blue hearts, because that's an idea that started with Wembury, this symbol, wasn't it?
Yeah, these. I think you meant to show. Do you make some of them?
Yeah.
So
no, for us, but not for you.
Yeah, no. Well, you can't get hold of them for love nor money. If you ever go onto their website, I think they haven't. Well, I think the pandemic's helped, but it's also one of those symbols which everyone's trying to buy into.
Yeah.
So we've been doing that in Ivy Bridge as well. So it's making that symbol where it's a bit softer, but it's basically saying we're leaving this verge for a really good reason, but we're framing it again. So doing a really short metre strip in front, then a sign saying what you're doing, and also talking to the contractors not to cut it and why you're not cutting it. But yeah, it was Easter last year. I don't know how. I'm not sure if you came out to Kate. So in Ivy Bridge, we did a 25 metre by 4 metre strip. We just rotivated it, and we had 20 people came out and raked it all off. And within 2 hours, we managed to rake off this whole area and wildflower seed it. And 3 months later, it came up, and it was absolutely beautiful. But it was really diverse. It wasn't all those showy colours, but it worked. For some reason, that just came up really well, and I think we got so many good comments. And it was just it was a strip of Verge that wasn't being touched, and so no one used it. They got mown about 8 times, 12 times a year, and it just showed you if you relaxed the mowing, rotivated an area, and we also planted around the edge of it some 4 crab apples, 4 rowans, and 4 cherry trees. So that just adding that other diversity into the site. So, yeah. But,
Thank you. I'm really glad that you touched on the community side of things. So that's obviously what you do. And like I said earlier, I think it is all about people and engaging people. So thank you for that. I'm sorry, Helen, that you are last. You've all
Green
but Helen from Green Minds in Plymouth, again, talking about community engagement in public spaces and what we can do as groups of people to work with nature.
Sorry, just when you thought all the talks were finished, it wasn't originally on the billing, but Kate's asked me just to, and I've literally got like 10 slides, so it's not going to be too intense, just to talk a bit about the Green Minds project in Plymouth, because all the work that's going on around here is absolutely fantastic, but I thought it's nice to see how it all links, maybe Plymouth and the South Hams a little bit separate. So it's nice if we can kind of show the links, and the wildlife doesn't care about boundaries, does it? So yeah, my name's Helen Parr, and I also work for Devon Wildlife Trust, like Lynne, and I started there in 2014, and I was working on a project called the Devon Greater Horseshoe Bat Project, and I worked on that for 6 years, and that was around Devon. And then since last year I've been working on the Green Minds project, with the exciting job title of Urban Ranger. More on that later. I haven't got a horse or anything. If we go on to the next slide. So a little bit about the project. It's a 3-year project, and it's funded by the European Regional Development Fund project through an Urban Innovative Actions scheme. It's led by Plymouth City Council, but there are 6 other partner organisations on the project, and so Devon Wildlife Trust is one of those. Also the University of Plymouth, the National Trust, Plymouth College of Art, Real Ideas Organisation and the Data Place. So there's it's really innovative because it's not just conservation organisations, it's a real mixture of different organisations who can all bring their different skills and experience to the project. And the main aims of Green Minds is to improve the health and well-being of everyone in Plymouth, or some people, quite a big aim, isn't it? Increase biodiversity for wildlife, and encourage and support green enterprise, so businesses being quite green in the things that they're doing as well. And it does have its own website, and there's some postcards there with the details, but it's greenmindsplymouth.com. Next slide, please. And so the vision of the project is that rewilding people and places. I'll talk about that in a minute, because I think rewilding gets bandied around a lot as a term, and it means different things to different people. But the project aims to put nature at the heart of decision making. So this is the key, is that maybe in the past with some of the management of the green spaces in places like Plymouth, that top of the list hasn't been nature, or nature hasn't been considered. And so now the idea is that that becomes sort of embedded in the decision making, so that there's more investment in nature-based solutions is another jargony thing that's bandied around conservation organisations at the moment. But the idea is using nature, like working with nature, not against nature. And changing, and the whole Green Minds name of the project is about challenging assumptions and changing mindsets and behaviours, sort of how we engage with nature and work with nature. So next slide, please. And why do we want to do it and create Green Minds? Well, going back to rewilding of people and places, to me, rewilding can mean lots of things, but it's just about really making space for nature. And that could be on a ginormous estate in Scotland, or it could be in your back garden. So there's a whole load of things, and you can no one's really agreed, I think, on what rewilding as a term, really, the definition of it is. But for me, it's things like that little space there around a lamppost, and what can you do there? So there's lots of potential in your garden or in your towns and villages or out in the countryside also. And it's about connecting people with local green spaces. So I think I'm preaching probably to a lot of the converted here tonight, but we all know, I think we all knew, if we didn't know before the pandemic, we do now of the value of getting out into green spaces for our physical and mental well-being. And so by working with local communities and getting out into nature, I think there's science is showing us now that trees and plants produce these like tiny microbes which they use to protect themselves against disease. And when we walk amongst trees or out in nature, we inhale these microbes, and they think it could help us boost our own immune systems. So it's really amazing, quite recent science on that. And taking action for nature is something that we can all do, even if it's just in a really small way. So the Devon Wildlife Trust and the Wildlife Trust as a national movement are really pushing this whole taking action for nature message. And the Devon Wildlife Trust supporting a really great campaign called Action for Insects, which is a really good example and there's stuff on our website about that, and the Devon Wildlife Trust website. It's just a way of showing everyone they can help, because I think at the moment with the climate emergency and everything else, we often feel a little bit powerless, and people often one of the questions we get asked most at events is, well, what can I do? And when I was working on the bat project, what can I do? And I'm like, well, bats need insects, and so you can help by having insects in your, promoting and encouraging insects into your gardens. And so this sort of project builds on that, really. And next slide, please. So my urban ranger role, not on a horse, is basically working across different aspects of the Green Minds project, working with all the other partners, and so bringing the experience that Devon Wildlife Trust has, our sort of wildlife and conservation experience, to the project, and supporting the partners if they want any help or training. And so part of that is we're developing a training programme, both not just for the public but for professionals, so people within those partner organisations, so sort of upskilling them in green thinking and the latest sort of knowledge and evidence around all these different solutions to problems that we might have in the green spaces. But also things for the public, so like some training in how to carry out surveys, things like tree planting, meadow creation, and lots of other things like that. And working with the council, like the street services teams, to look at alternative, it says pest control, but sort of pests being like unwanted plant control, and looking at reducing the use of pesticides, because that's pretty much the number one thing we can all do in our gardens and green spaces, is just ditch the chemicals, because whenever you use any sort of pesticide or chemical, you're definitely going to be affecting the wildlife. So looking at other methods of removing plants in the wrong place, which some people call a weed, but there's no such thing as a weed, I don't think. It's just a plant that someone thinks they don't want in that particular place. And working with lots of community groups and organisations around the city as well. This project finishes in August next year, so anything we're doing now, we want to just embed the knowledge, support people so they can carry on with all the good work at the end of the project. And I'm also supporting some Green Minds apprentices, 6 young people who are working for Plymouth City Council in some of the different teams, such as the street services, the landscape teams, and the arboricultural teams, and supporting them with some specific training, and so to try and get that mindset as they go forward into their careers of what, thinking about nature, putting nature at the heart of a lot of their decision making. Next one, please. And then, so there's 5 key, we can't cover the whole of Plymouth, so there's 5 key areas, or investment areas that we're working in. One is focused around the Derriford Community Park, which is, I don't know if you know about that massive road building project that's going on in Liam, near the big Asda there. That is near, there's a farm called Pool Farm that the Plymouth City Council own. A lot of people don't know about it. It's not publicly accessible, but it's going to become more accessible in that area. And there's a woodland area there, and there's a sort of river running through, and there's an orchard that's been planted. So there's quite a big area running all the way up the valley towards Derriford Hospital. And there's actually a beaver reintroduction project there. So some of you might have heard of Devon Wildlife Trust's beaver project in East Devon on the River Otter. And that's this is a secured enclosure beaver reintroduction, but there's going to be a pair of beavers introduced into that later this year, and they're fantastic. I won't start talking about beavers now, that's another talk, but they're fantastic natural engineers to help with reducing flooding. And in Plymouth, in those areas, there's lots of housing and concrete, so whenever there's a really heavy rainfall, there's tons of runoff, and it's not going anywhere, it's just sort of pouring down and causing problems. And so beavers, by the dams that they create, they can help to slow down the water and prevent flooding further downstream. In the west of the city, sort of Keyham and that sort of area, we're looking at how we can link together the parks and verges and other little green spaces to create wildlife corridors or rewilding corridors through that part of the city. As Lynne already mentioned, you have to provide these routes, otherwise wildlife is just like stuck in one area and it can't get to different areas. In the Devonport and Stonehouse area, there's some small grant funding support for small businesses and social sort of enterprises to do green things around their buildings and the work they're doing. And in Central Park, there's a big project called SUDS, which when I started on the project, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, sense, but apparently it's a sustainable urban drainage scheme. And so they have problems with flooding there. Apparently, on heavy rainfall, it all just runs down and causes problems, flooding. So they're looking at, again, working with nature rather than against nature to slow that down and create some quite a large sort of pond areas at the bottom of the park and planting there. And at Saltram, they've got big plans actually for the future there, and some of that is part of the Green Minds project, and it involves planting a community orchard on the east of the site, quite near the Stag Lodge entrance. Some of you probably know. And also there's a sort of woodlandy area which I'd never really noticed before, and I went and had a visit recently, and they're looking at improving that and making that better for wildlife. So those are the five key areas that the project is focused on. Next slide, please. And then to finish, I've got a few slides of just some of the things that have been going on. And these two on the left are just from an event that I went to on Tuesday. And this is in Keam, and there's quite a few parks in that area. I mean, I didn't know Plymouth had so many parks. I knew about Central Park, but there's loads of other parks, and they're really, really important to the people that live around them, and they're really well used. And we there's quite a lot of improvements and tree planting and meadow creation work going on. And so this was a small community event, planting some native fruit trees. And the lady in the middle of that photo there, she runs the local cubs, which they have their huts out in the corner nearby, and they are going to plant 200 whips to create a hedge along the side of that at one of their pack meetings next week, I think. And also we've given them some wildflower seed, and they're going to sow an area of wildflowers as well. So they're really excited about that, because they're all doing their conservation badges. So that should be nice. I can't take any credit for the picture on the right, but these are from my predecessor on the project, and just showing some of the impact there. Obviously, nice colourful flowers, those ones, but what's being done around the city. Next slide, please. And then I helped with a few events last summer called Fit and Fed, which were run through the summer holidays in the parks, in the different parks, Victoria Park and Alexandra Park and Central Park, which were completely free and laid on by the council for families to come, and children could come, and the fed bit was that they got a free lunch, so that was quite popular, all laid on by the council, and we could spread the message about the project, and we did some arts and crafts activities, and there were lots of other things going on at the same time. And then we've had things like this pruning event in the top right there, where Tess Wilmot, who runs an organisation called Always Apples, was showing how the local people how to prune the fruit trees in the corner of the park. And there's some children from a local school came along, and they're very excited because they found not one but about 4 different toads, like just sort of sheltering under the mulch under the trees. So it was just showing, even in a park like that, just plant a tree there, and you know the wildlife was coming, as everyone's been saying, really. Next, please. And just quickly, we're working quite closely with Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, which is affiliated with Devon Wildlife Trust, and they have done a lot of baseline surveys. So some people have mentioned monitoring, but it's really important. I think this probably applies to lots of your projects around the parishes, to see what you've got before you start. And like Andrew was saying, just see what's there. Don't just go in, like someone was saying to me the other day, spray it all off, turn all the soil over and plant all your seeds and all flower. It's like, just don't do that. See what you've got, survey what you've got, and then you can monitor it. And only by monitoring it, and this is a big thing on the Green Minds project, can you see and measure the changes that you've made. And the changes might not be quite what you expected, so then you can modify what you're doing, and so you can't, otherwise you're never going to know. And it also helps to demonstrate the benefits of what you're doing. And DBRC have their own website, and they encourage everyone across Devon to submit any wildlife sightings. So take a look at their website and submit things to that. Next, please. Nearly there. Finally, there are just lots more of. There is a lot of information out there. So the Green Wines website has an events page, so we're running quite a lot of events, trying to do an online talk sort of once a month, and then we've got some in-person stuff coming up in Plymouth, if you don't mind going all that way into Plymouth. And there's a knowledge hub on there which has some resources, and then the Devon Wildlife Trust website also has events, but obviously they have events right around the county, so you might want to take a look there. I've already mentioned the Taking Action for Insects, that if you sign up to that, you can get a guide for individuals or for community groups or for schools, so they have different information and resources. And there's also a wildlife gardening booklet you can download as well, so there's no excuse. And the last slide's just a nice picture, I think. And thank you for listening. Anyway, some more flowers, and I hopefully that's of interest, and maybe some of you might not have heard about that project before. Now you have.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Helen. That was really, really interesting. We've talked a lot about connecting habitats, but the idea of connecting communities and connecting people with each other, I think, is all part and parcel of the same thing, and one can't happen without the other. So brilliant to hear what you have. It's only up the road, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Come along to some event.
Definitely, and what I might do afterwards is anyone who's, well, I've got all your emails actually. I think I'm all right with GDPR, aren't I? If I forward to you any links that might have been useful from tonight, if you'd rather not, please write back and say, delete me from your hard disk, and that's fine. And Plymouth, I believe, won Green City of the Year award. Is that the right title? I heard recently.
When was that one last? Yeah,
There
there was
was
something
something
about that last time. I probably might have been involved in it at that point. I'm not sure.
So I've got
There's also Plymouth Marine Park, and that park is just that's all starting up. There's loads of different projects going on around the city. It's really interesting.
And all of these projects rely on people and volunteers. It seems to me, my little experience of this, there's plenty of money out there actually that we can tap into. But what you need is people to use that money to inspire others to come along. The physical labour, the thinking and the organisation of it all. So Be Wild is always looking for volunteers here in Yealmpton, as will the Yealmpton Environment Group. I know I've had some great days actually with Parklife. I've really enjoyed volunteering with all the stuff you do. Ivy Bridge, Totnes. I have been to Wembury actually. So it's all accessible.
I think we've got about 5 different groups on the go now. So
yeah. And it's enjoyable as much as it's actually useful, obviously, for the nature conservation side of it.
Yeah, I mean, today we were planting large trees out in Ivy Bridge, and I've just put a shout out on Monday, and I think we had 5-6 people come and join us, didn't we, James, today? And really loved it, just got stuck in, had some spare time, and that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about, absolutely. So I hope you've learnt something, I hope you've been inspired a little way. I will send out a few links that might be of use to some of you, and hopefully see you at volunteer projects in the future. And thank you very, very much for our speakers for giving up your time this evening to come and talk to us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.